Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Today we're going to talk about an article that The Hill had published earlier this month, and it was with regard to Navy pilots experiencing weird objects, objects that they don't think are drones, or they can't explain them. They don't know what they are, and a lot of times these objects seem like they're going to cause a collision. They're going to collide with these objects. Now, this article, the headline is "Stunned by UFOs, Exasperated Fighter Pilots Get Little Help from the Pentagon." Now, before I start reading this article, I just want to say that I don't see, how's the Pentagon going to help? I mean, I think this is the reason why they're not getting any help from the Pentagon, because certain people in the Pentagon understand that there's nothing that could be done about this. How could you tell our extraterrestrial visitors to stay away from our Navy jets? It's just, you can't do that. So when these guys are up there practicing, preparing for any kind of attack on the United States, they just have to deal with this. Anyway, there is an effort that is being undertaken to try to figure out what these objects are. They're trying to provide a better. There's an effort to try to provide a better reporting system for pilots to report when they come in contact, when they come close to these strange objects. But I'll leave the link for this article. But after you read this article, you'll understand that this is not something out of China or Russia, and it's certainly not something that's being tested by some secret group within our own military. Why would you do that? Why would you endanger the lives of your Navy pilots to test? That would be criminal. To test some sort of object. But when you hear the description of some of these objects, they describe one type of object, right? There's no way this isn't man-made. Right? There's no, these things are being spotted, 100 miles offshore, right? The pilots say that, they're there all the time, right? And there's no, they never see any support base for these objects. They never see the objects if they're going in and out of a submarine. They never see that happening. These objects are able to stay in the air and fly at the same speeds as the jets themselves, or faster. Right, fly away from them. These objects are not man-made. That's what's going on here. Obviously, what's going on here is there most certainly are extraterrestrial bases under the ocean, under the oceans of the world. There's no question about it. The pilots have been seeing these things out at sea since the 40s, since the late 40s. They've been seeing them come in. Some have actually seen flying saucers fly out of the ocean. But anyway, let's look at this. Let's go through this article a little bit, and then you'll see what I'm talking about. It says, in April 2014, 4 naval aviators narrowly escaped disaster. Just as they entered highly controlled airspace for a training exercise, their 2 FA-18F fighter jets nearly collided with an unidentified flying object. To the frustration of dozens of their fellow aviators, such a near catastrophe was inevitable. For months before and after the incident, air crews flying in exclusive use training areas off the United States East Coast frequently observed unknown objects exhibiting highly anomalous flight characteristics. Despite the collision hazard posed by the UFOs, aviators lacked a formal mechanism to report the mysterious objects. With aviation safety alerts as their only recourse, frustrated aviators and their commanders noted that the UFOs pose a severe threat to naval aviation and a critical risk to flight safety. Just days before the April 2014 incident, the squadron's exasperated commander wrote that it's only a matter of time before this results in a mid-air collision. A few weeks earlier, the skipper of another East Coast squadron warned, "I feel it may only be a matter of time before one of our FA-18 aircraft has a mid-air collision. Despite the frequency of the encounters and the severity of the hazard, it took the Navy 5 years to adopt a formal UFO reporting structure. The first batch of these reports, heavily redacted and spanning only a few months in 2019, makes clear that the United States government faces a significant challenge. In one UFO incident, an aviator reported that he had, quote, never seen anything like this before, end quote. In another encounter, an aviator noticed an object with flight characteristics unlike anything I had seen in my redacted years of redacted, implying a particularly anomalous encounter. Yet another pilot's report states that she had never seen redacted like it. The UFO did not change position like an aircraft would and was too high to be a ship. For fighter pilots armed with an array of advanced sensors, the confusion and bewilderment reflected in the reports is striking. One aviator had a difficult time explaining the redacted. In another incident, a pilot could only describe a UFO in a puzzled voice over the radio. Yet another aviator described a UFO that appeared as odd as it sounds to be redacted. Unfortunately, a lot of this report that came out, there's sections of it redacted, so you got to use your imagination to fill in the blanks. Anyway, continuing, former Navy fighter pilot Ryan Graves served with the aviators involved in the 2014 near collision. In an interview, I asked Graves, now a vocal advocate for aviation safety via sober scientific investigation of UFOs, about the recently released reports. I see frustration. I see confusion about what the aviators are seeing, Graves told me. There's not normal language in the UFO reports. That's not how we operate. Graves, it should be noted, is not your run-of-the-mill former fighter pilot. The only member of the officer candidate school class selected to fly fighter jets, Graves advanced rapidly, flying his first combat mission less than 2 weeks after completing training. Paired with a weapon systems officer, Graves was among only 2 or 3 air crews in a Navy fighter squadron selected as airborne forward air controllers. Soon thereafter, he was among only 2 air crews in his entire air wing selected to control ultra-sensitive missions, rescuing friendly personnel from hostile territory. To top it off, Graves became his squadron's head landing signal officer and, following rigorous hands-on training, served as an aviation safety officer. Unsurprisingly, Graves takes the Pentagon's foot-dragging on UFOs seriously and personally. Quote, I lost about a friend a year on average while I was in the Navy. This is a dangerous business. To think that we're adding more danger for no reason is outlandish, Graves told me. For Graves, 8 years of relative government inaction since his squadron's 2014 near collision, quote, is unacceptable. It's a demonstration of ignoring the needs of their operators. That's the bottom line, end quote. Referring to a recent congressional hearing on UFOs, Graves drove this point home, telling me, in the last hearing it was presented as, we don't know what these objects are, but everything's under control. Hey, look at this video. It kind of looks like a balloon. That, I felt, was disingenuous, especially when we consider the language the aviators are using in the declassified UFO reports, Graves said. Pointing to several accounts in which aviators appear to methodically rule out mundane explanations for their UFO encounters, Graves told me, to the best of their ability, these men and women are not putting their balloon sightings on this form. They are ruling prosaic explanations out as much as they can. Importantly, Graves said, aviators have a lot of paperwork to do. They don't want to fill these forms out for easily explainable objects. I expect the new reporting mechanisms are only revealing a small part of the problem. As the reports make clear, aviators are eager for answers regarding their UFO encounters. Requests and queries such as, quote, please respond via classified email, end quote, and then, quote, any questions please ask, end quote, quote, responses to working classified email, please, and, quote, will be another Office of Naval Intelligence brief before we deploy, punctuate many of the reports. According to Graves, I see aviators searching and looking for help, looking for answers, and I see them getting nothing back. I guarantee they're angry that this is interfering with their job. People seem exasperated, he continued. Expressing his own frustration, Graves said that it is not the aviators' responsibility to report UFOs. They have much more important things to be doing. Of note, Graves told me that his fear is that If there's no feedback, then the data is not going to be perceived as valuable, and reports will stop coming in. Emphasizing this point, Graves said the aviators who observe UFOs want to help, but from their side, it doesn't seem like anything is happening. If they don't get feedback, they're going to stop submitting their reports. For his part, Graves remains puzzled about the strange objects that he and his fellow aviators observed hovering in place, irrespective of wind, or flying at several hundred miles per hour for remarkably long periods of time. According to Graves, we'd go on a flight in the morning, they'd be out there. You go on a flight in the evening, they're out there. They were pretty much always there when we went out there. Asked whether the UFOs could be mundane objects such as balloons and drones, Graves told me, quote, "We don't see those out there in training areas. I see those near airports. I see those over the continental United States, but I don't see those in our working areas. We're way out there, in some cases hundreds of miles out to sea, and yet there's air traffic operating, and they're operating in ways that are befuddling our aviators," Graves said. If the mysterious objects were drones, Graves speculated, either they have some source of energy that allows them to stay airborne for very long periods of time, or there is some massive operation involving hundreds, if not thousands, of drones and boats, and they are constantly launching and landing, and somehow we haven't seen that. Moreover, training ranges typically begin 10 or more miles offshore, which, according to Graves, is a significant barrier for drones. Quote, "Even if they were submarine launched, we would see them descending to the ocean at some point. We'd see something. Even if they just blew up, we'd see something," he said. Regarding balloons, Graves told me, "I would occasionally see small party balloons at very low altitudes. I got balloons on my radar and then saw them visually. Usually they're behaving in a predictable manner, moving with the wind. They're not moving very quickly. Ultimately, drones and balloons aren't that mystical to fighter pilots," Graves said. "If I see them on the radar and I can see how they are moving and the airspeed, it's not going to confuse me." In stark contrast to the military's recent UFO reports, Graves said there's no mystery with drones and balloons. But the mystery only deepens as Graves recalls the shape of the objects observed by aviators off the East Coast. One of the pilots involved in the 2014 near collision described the UFO as a dark cube inside of a clear sphere with no wings or obvious means of propulsion. Okay, let's just stop there for a minute. Okay. A dark cube inside of a clear sphere with no wings or any obvious means of propulsion. That's what in 2014 one of the objects was described as. So that's something that we don't have. That's something that's not being operated by anybody on this planet that could maintain flights hundreds of miles out at sea. Right? And it's impossible, right? These objects are obviously unearthly. They're extraterrestrial. That's what they are. Anyway, continuing. A few years after the 2014 incident, a test pilot flying in a nearby area told Graves of an encounter with such an object. According to Graves, a cube in a sphere UFO was just riding along with him about 30 feet from the aircraft before it zipped off. More recently, one of Graves' former student pilots, along with a senior officer, observed one of the objects. As Graves' former student told him, "They're still out there. The object that looked exactly like what you said, a cube in a sphere, they're still there." From instructor to student, the UFOs now transcend at least one generation of fighter pilots. Nor are the encounters unique in the Navy. While he has not spoken with them directly, Graves is aware of a number of Air Force F-22 crews that are experiencing similar issues. Ultimately, Graves is committed to scientific investigation of the mysterious objects that he and dozens of his fellow aviators observed in recent years. To that end, he is spearheading an effort to gather scientists, engineers, and aerospace experts associated with the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics to analyze the UFO problem. According to Graves, we've been reaching out under the context of their members, engineers and scientists, and we're getting very positive feedback. Scientists, engineers from industry are messaging me with their personal stories that they perhaps haven't shared before. Technical experts, scientists, programmers, to name a few, from across the aerospace industry are extremely excited to be part of this. Importantly, as Graves notes, the Department of Defense isn't aligned around scientific discovery. They have their plate full with the responsibility of defending our country. Let's let's relieve that burden from them. Let's carefully reconsider our classification processes. Let's enable a process to move UFO-related data through a review and declassification process that is governed by an oversight committee with DoD, academic, industry, and civilian constituents, he said. We need to enable new processes that allow new minds and new experts to analyze the data holistically. Okay. That's great. I'm glad that they're bringing in, you're trying to bring in the scientific community to try to look at this, for the Pentagon. But I still firmly believe that many people in the Pentagon already know what the answer is. I shouldn't say many. There's a small group of people who know that this is extraterrestrial. There's no doubt in my mind. They've known this for a long time, and that's why really nothing's been done. I mean, I can't imagine anyone in the Pentagon not wanting to investigate this to figure out what's going on. Especially when it seems like some of the Navy pilots might crash into one of these objects. That's because they know there's nothing they could do about it. So that's why they really don't seem. It seems like they don't really care. That's my belief, anyhow. But I guess just to assuage the concerns of people who have to deal with these objects and have no answers as to what they are, I guess the Pentagon saying, okay, yeah, you get your scientists and you guys could try to study it. But these guys already have a pretty good idea what these things are. Again, secret group within the government structure someplace. They know this is extraterrestrial cubes inside of a sphere. Come on, that's not something that's terrestrial made. These objects are obviously, they're not from China. They're not from Russia. They're not some secret program, right? Why would, for one thing, let's rule out the secret program right off the bat, because why would we take those chances with our fighting men and women? Why would we do that? Why would we throw these objects, as and have them potentially collide with one of our fighter jets? Why would we do that? I mean, so you could rule that out, immediately. And then it's not Russia or China. There's no support base. They don't see any support base. There's nothing there, right? They're up there for hours. They're not drones. That's the other thing. You hear a lot of the debunkers out there will try to say, well, they're seeing, they call them drones. These aren't drones. They're not drones. Drones aren't cubes inside of spheres. That sounds something like out of a science fiction movie. Cubes inside of a sphere? Dark cube inside of a sphere? That's not a drone. It's obviously something else. And it's not just these. I mean, you rarely hear of an object described as like this, a cube inside of a dark cube inside of a sphere. You don't usually hear stuff like that. Usually you hear about flying saucers or other, maybe a triangle. But usually you don't hear dark cube inside of sphere. That's something, you don't really hear about too much. But obviously, there's a lot of guys, a lot of men and women who are fighter pilots that are seeing these things when they're, doing training missions out at hundreds of miles offshore. Right, they're seeing these things, and they're there, and they fly around, they move around, they fly just as fast as the aircraft that they're in, and sometimes even faster. They just zip away, as the one guy described. So basically, we're being observed. There's some sort of, for whatever purpose, I don't know, right? But there are objects out there that are clearly unearthly, right? And obviously, what does this tell you? This tells you that there's some sort of, probably extraterrestrial motherships or extraterrestrial bases under the oceans of this world. That's where they're most likely hiding out, because of obviously the ocean's water covers a majority of this planet, and that's the easiest place for them to hide. But obviously they're sending out some of their technology, I don't know, to spy on us, maybe for some other purpose. Maybe it has nothing to do with us, and they're just, whatever, but they're there, right? They're there, and our Navy pilots are seeing them. Sometimes they almost wreck into these things, and, the Pentagon, apparently, seemingly, acted like, well, there's nothing we could do about it. That's because I think there are people who know there is nothing you could do about it. We're just going to have to deal with it, and hopefully we don't wreck into one of them. But yeah, so basically, our Navy pilots on a regular basis are seeing extraterrestrial craft offshore all the time on a regular basis. That's the bottom line.